So we have a few members of the panel. The discussions, the moderator will be Michelle Bender. She's a leading expert in the field of earth law, specifically rights of nature, RON, where she has contributed to drafting rights of nature laws and policies worldwide, including the United States, Panama, Philippines, and within international law and institutions. She's the founder and creator of Ocean Rights, which builds upon the rights of nature framework within Ocean Policy Seascape. She serves as a legal counsel for Ocean Vision Legal, as an advisory board member for the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, and is a member of IUCN's World Commission on Environmental Law. In 2018, she was named one of the 15 youth ocean leaders talking and taking on the world internationally by Sustainable Ocean Alliance. So let me welcome Michelle Bender. She will be taking over the second part of the show today. And of course, we have other members of the panel who will join us up on stage: Natalia Green, Carlos Gaimo, and Kelly Wielenberg, through the video conference once again. But of course, we have new members of the panel, and it's for me an honor again to present them. Joining us, Professor Dr. Agustin Grijalva. Is it good? Yeah? Grijalva. Professor Grijalva holds a PhD in political science at the University of Pittsburgh and at the University of Kansas, and a law degree at Pontifical Catholic University in Quito, Ecuador. He was an advisor at 1998 Constitutional Assembly of Ecuador. He is also a Constitutional Court of Ecuador justice, and of course, a member of the Ecuadorian Higher Education Council until 2022. At that time, he wrote some rulings related to rights of nature for the court. Currently, he is a law professor and teaches constitutional law. He has published several articles in Bolivia, Ecuador, and the United States, Colombia, Brazil, Peru, Spain, and Mexico. Hey, give him a round of applause, Mr. Dr. Professor Agustin. Thank you. He'll be joining us today. Another member of the panel is Nadine Silva. She was born and raised in Aruba. At age 18, she moved to the Netherlands to study biology in Utrecht. She has a master's degree in limnology and oceanography, wow, where she researched different morphologies of brain corals in Curacao. After graduating, she worked for 4 years as an environmental consultant for industrial companies. In 2022, she moved back to Aruba do Chiteira, where she is now a policy advisor at the Directorate of Nature and Environment Affairs. Nadine, with her background and role at the Directorate, assisted the Minister of Nature in creating the draft amendment Rights of Nature for Aruba. Round of applause for Nadine. And last but not least, we want to welcome Geert Rep. He is joining the panelist stage, yes, of course. Works as a lawyer for the Republic de Cuba, right? He started his career in the Netherlands in 1991 and has been practicing law in Aruba for 20 years. Okay, I understand. Since 2016, he has acted on behalf of the NGO Aruba BirdLife Conservation and filed more than 15 court cases against infringing companies and the country of Aruba. He works as a lawyer for the Cuba lawyers, that's to my understanding. And now let's welcome them on stage. They'll be debating.
Is this working? Okay, perfect. Hi, thank you all, and happy Earth Day. I'm really excited to host this discussion with all these incredible panelists, and Callie is with us on video conferencing as well. We'll move a bit fast through this, but we do have 10 minutes or so of Q&A after the panel, so please keep your questions in mind. But before we dive in, I want us to just slow down and ground us together and ask us all to take 2 deep breaths. Now, we have nature to thank for that. Half of the oxygen we breathe comes from land-based sources, the forest, the plants, and half the oxygen comes from the ocean and the tiny little phytoplankton that photosynthesize there. We've heard today that rights of nature can be a powerful tool to restore and rebalance our relationship with nature, from going from dominion, subjugation, and separateness towards the relationship of holism, mutual enhancement, and partnership, where our laws, human laws align with natural laws, and our activity becomes constrained within the capacity of nature to sustain them. But rightfully so, there are often concerns or questions that come with what does rights of nature mean in practice. And so I'd like to start and kick off this panel by asking both Ms. Callie and Ms. Natalia, what are some concerns you've heard or misconceptions that you would like to address to the audience today? And if we can start with Callie. And if not, maybe we can start with Natalia.
Is Callie? Do we have Callie or should I? Oh, there she is.
Oh, there she is. Yay, hi.
Hold on, Callie.
Concept of the rights of nature. Are we okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. One of the questions I'm asked frequently is, does this mean I can't cut down a tree in my backyard? And I think it's important to think about the fact that the rights of nature movement isn't trying to control land use in your backyard. It's on a tree by tree level basis. It's more about preserving and protecting the integrity of nature on an ecosystem and species level perspective. And the second thing that I think comes up a lot is, I don't know how to get involved in the rights of nature if I'm not a lawyer or a politician. And I just want to highlight again that everyone can be part of this movement and have ownership over it. You don't need to be a lawyer. A lot of times there aren't even classes that touch on the subject within legal training at law school. We all have shared experiences and different perspectives, and that requires us to have different responsibilities across society and a different role to play in advocating for the rights of nature. I'm sure many of you here are protectors of nature in your own capacities through policy, science, governance, storytelling, art, advocacy, maybe even philanthropy. And I think we can all use our own talents and strengths to have a vital role in conserving the oceans and nature through recognizing the rights of nature. And I mean, from my perspective, being a field scientist, I often feel like scientists on the ground have this firsthand perspective when it comes to the ecological crisis, because we're on the front lines and we're seeing the decline of these species populations firsthand. And sometimes it's the destruction of a habitat or the loss of a species that can be the catalyst for new protection measures. So I just want to inspire everyone in the room to think about how you can use your own perspectives and unique experiences to advocate for the rights of nature.
Thank you, Callie. Natalia, would you like to add on?
Sure, I would like to add something from what I was telling you before. One of the things about like the intangibility of nature that Callie was saying, we all have an impact in nature, and we're not talking about like an intangible nature. So I think that's a very important one. The next one is that lawyers are going to be, or have to become, like our best defenders, because right now, many of them will question the rights of nature. In law school, and the lawyers here will tell me, Law 101 tells you that subjects of rights are people and corporations. They don't question corporations. We as a society don't question that a corporation has rights, but nature is an object. So changing the mindset of lawyers is really important, and that's really something important to say. When we were in Ecuador, they were telling us, so what are you going to have, like an ombudsman for the frog? They were saying, they were trying to mock that. And are you going to bring nature to a court if there's a volcano eruption? That was another misconception. And we were saying, no, like nature complies with her responsibilities every day, giving us clean water and clean air, and we are not taking in consideration our responsibilities. So the idea is not to have an ombudsman for the frog. The idea is to change the relationship with nature, and it's not an idea to limit development. I think that's very important because I think as a question here, we're not aiming to limit development, we're aiming to have like quality development, a balanced development with nature, and change that around so that we can change the relationship with nature. Because we can think that by limiting or by saying no or putting a cap to something, we're affecting ourselves. Well, in the long run, if there's no nature, we are affecting ourselves. So in the long run, we're also talking about ourselves, but it's important to know that we're doing this for nature and putting nature ahead. There are many misconceptions, but hopefully we address those.
No, thank you, Natalia, and hopefully that helps clear up a few questions that you might have before the Q&A as well. So I'd like to turn to a few folks who work in Aruba and ask, you know, how might Rights in Nature change the work you do? And I'll start with here.
Thank you, Michelle. Well, we are here a couple of days already with these guests from abroad. And recently, I think it was yesterday, that Michelle and I discussed there's also an artificial intelligence app. And I asked a question, Michelle said, I asked this ChatGPT or Nova, it was called, said how, what was it? Why should Aruba recognize the rights of nature? And it was a beautiful essay with first, secondly, third, etc. I think 1.5 pages long. And then I said, okay, as a lawyer, you have to think outside the box. Now I'm going to ask, why should Aruba not recognize the rights of nature? And I'm going to read you what it says. As an AI language model, I don't have beliefs, opinions, or personal interests, but in general, recognizing the rights of nature is becoming more and more relevant in addressing environmental issues and ensuring sustainability. The recognition of these rights would promote the protection and conservation of natural ecosystems and their living entities, such as animals, plants, rivers, and would provide legal standings in these ecosystems to allow for legal action. By not recognizing the rights of nature, Aruba may miss out on the opportunity to take proactive measures to preserve and protect the environment for future generations. Funny. This is the answer. If you ask, why should it not? Actually, the answer is you cannot answer that question in any other way than that you should acknowledge and that you should recognize those rights. Okay, that is at least what I would like to say as a anecdote, what we had recently. But the question was, of course, how would it change the line of work that you do? Well, Carlos, I think, explained very well that if we come as Aruba to the amendment of the constitution, the staatsregeling, then you see that one of the important principles is being added to the other basic rights that exist and are acknowledged. Will that change my work as of tomorrow from the moment it's being implemented? Of course not. Of course not. Just like there is still discrimination, the rights of nature will not immediately have its effect tomorrow if it is implemented in the Constitution. But it should be seen as a foundation to adapt laws and policies that make this fundamental right into account. It also helps creating jurisprudence where a named balance, I think it's important to say it's a named balance opposite of the other rights and the things that happen economically, for instance, they get a position. And I would say after, and Erin has already told you that we had a couple of court cases, now we are at the top, trying to be at the top with the amendment of the Constitution. From there we go top down and we adapt laws, policies, etc. And from there on, I think we would have a beautiful system. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to. It was the AI, wasn't it? Yeah. So I'd like to turn to Nadine to share her perspective as well.
Thank you, Michelle. Like Carlos already mentioned, how will it affect my work as a policy advisor? By including rights of nature in our constitution, we're laying the foundation, and it's also very important to take the next steps as well. So to incorporate or to adapt our laws and policies. So this will not just stay like a symbolic thing. The implementation is very important. So this is the first step. It's a very important step. But I think the policies, so the next steps are also very important. And I would like to briefly explain why I think at this moment, our nature conservation ordinance, the Natuurbeschermingsverordening, it was created in 1995, and it might have been a good tool back then, but we've learned a lot, and we're in a completely different situation right now, and it's not adequate anymore. It needs to be updated. And for example, in this ordinance, it provides protection to more on the individual level, so native plants and the threatened native species of flora and fauna are protected, or individual plants or group of plants that are considered valuable. But we're not looking at the whole ecosystem. And in nature, everything is connected. That's what Natalia also mentioned. Everything is connected to one another. So by giving ecosystems the right to exist and to flourish, we're giving every citizen the legal base to be a voice for nature. Thank you.
Thank you. So those responses actually bring up another great question that we hear often is, environmental laws already exist. We already have laws that are designed to protect nature. And so I think it'd be helpful to go into a little bit deeper about what is the difference between traditional environmental law and the rights of nature, or the added benefit that we have been seeing. And so I'd like to turn it first to Professor Agustin.
Hello, it's really a privilege to be here, and this is not a metaphor because I think the world is going to look at Aruba when the constitutional reform takes place. My experience in the Constitutional Court was that it's really very important, very useful to have rights of nature at the Constitution because if one is limited to the environmental law, sometimes there is just a formal view, a procedural view of how the environment has to be protected to the extent that humans, and just humans, don't suffer some damage. But if you have rights of nature at the highest law, then that is a deeper view in the sense that, first of all, is a systems view. In Los Cedros case, it was incredible because we have scientists from about 12 countries, I think, from universities and researchers from Europe, from the United States, and of course from Ecuador. We received 1,200 signatures from scientists from all over the world. They explain us what we were going to destroy in Los Cedros forest. We have there extremely high biodiversity. That's one of the hot spots in the world. So, first of all, we are not respecting, we are not protecting something like nature that is valuable in itself. But then, on the economic side, it was just crazy. And we had some even economic analysis showing that, the entire valley where the forest is, it was going to be affected because it was going to run out of water, because the water comes from Los Cedros, it was going to be contaminated, and then it was going to affect the agriculture, the ecotourism, the cattle, even the potential for pharmaceutical industry there. So it was a very bad business. It was going to affect something valuable in itself as nature, and that we couldn't recover. And it was also, to affect people, affect human rights. So, and the system's view of rights of nature is what helped the core to really look at the problem that, mining concessions granted by the Ecuadorian government in the forest was going to produce. Because we were going to get at the short-term income from mining. But then, what the country was going to lose was, even in economic terms, much bigger. And of course, we were going to lose something extremely with intrinsic value as endangered species and biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Agustin.
Very short, because I know we're running out of time. Talking about environmental law is for people, and rights of nature is for nature. And we have to keep both. It's not that we are going to get rid of rights of environmental law. It's that we are strengthening the protection of nature by including rights of nature. Going back to the example of the slave and slavery, we're not saying how many times can you hit your slave, how much you can pollute the water with mercury. We're saying do not hit your slave, because it's not a slave, it's a person. So that's the big change, and that's what the change that needs to happen. And even though we have not been able to change everything from one day to another, this top down and up, going from up and down, doing this is what the change that we need to urgently change a system that is in war against nature. And let me just tell you, it's worth doing it, even though we're not going to be able to apply or to change the whole world next day. We were hoping that Ecuador will change in 2009, and it didn't. We're still doing that 15 years later. But do not tell me that it wasn't worth to include the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights 75 years ago, although rights are being violated. You can see the change in the world with that declaration. So now it is the time to declare and to recognize the inherent rights of nature in our constitutions. That is the major level to strengthen environmental law, but also to give the space that we have forgotten and we have not taken into account to nature. So that's why I feel we are not getting rid of any of the others, we're just strengthening and giving ourselves better tools to protect nature in this urgent moment.
Yes, thank you. I love the connection Natalia says too, oftentimes about it being a value change, a shift in values as well, because we know that if you don't change the values, you don't change the implementation of laws, regardless of how great the language may be. So this aspect of rights, especially at the constitutional level, I would like to dig into a little bit more deeply and just ask, starting with Carlos, why recognize the rights of nature as a constitutional right? What does this mean in practice, and what happens when other rights like human rights conflict?
Thank you for that question, Michelle. Recognizing it in our Constitution, it means, and especially in the first chapter of our Constitution, makes it a fundamental law, and it means that all other type of legislation has to comply with it. The way we wrote it, we are giving constitutional instructions to the government, so it's more of a responsibility and also obligations to the government and to society. The question about conflicting fundamental rights, that's a very good question. I believe in general, you could say that the lawmaker, the government and parliament, when they pass lower level laws, national ordinances, usually you could say they are giving rights. They are giving rights, their responsibilities, obligations. They are saying we needed, there is an ombudsman, these are his rights, this is what he has to do. When you talk about fundamental rights, we are not giving any fundamental rights. We are recognizing fundamental rights. And in that case, I believe that the lawmaker, which is the government and parliament, shouldn't dig in too much into which one goes above the other. In such cases, I think this is something that's better left not for those chosen out of politics with a democratic mandate, but this is something for the courts. And because it matters a lot on specific situations. So it's very tough to go create an order of which fundamental right goes before the other. So I think it's something that shouldn't be, it's something better left for the courts. And I would like to add, though, that the way the law is written, the meaning of it, the interdependence between us as humans and nature, I think in practice, usually there will be a solution for both. Because the point is interdependence and harmony, and usually what is good for us somehow is good for nature also, and the other way around. So in practice, and the way the law is written, I don't foresee that there won't be a solution to any such questions that may come up, but I think there will be a solution.
And of course, Professor Agustin was a judge in a constitutional court. So I'm curious if you have anything quickly to add just in practice how that has looked.
Well, again, I think the Los Cedros case shows how rights of nature and human rights can be complementary, can support one to each other. Because in that case, the court didn't protect just the forests, the endangered species, the water sources, but also the people. The right to water, employment, because actually the peasants, they support also this case before the court. They were going to lose their farms, their source of income, which is, as I said, ecotourism, which is very important in that area. And also this pharmaceuticals industry potential. So in that case, the court saw as the rights of nature as complementary to human rights. And I think they must be complementary. Think about the right to health, for instance. Can we have, as humans, can we really have the human right to health without a healthy environment, without healthy ecosystems? Well, I think the virus, the COVID, showed around the world clearly that is impossible. That is why now, the World Health Organization talks about just one health. And that one health is the health of ecosystems and the health of people. So I think really it's clear now, we really have to be aware of, we live within an interdependent world where nature and humanity are part, the complexity. To me, that is pretty clear. And, if artificial intelligence is aware of that, I hope other people, including lawyers, some lawyers, can also be aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you. So I would like to switch gears just a little bit and dig a little bit deeper into what rights of nature would mean for the territorial waters of Aruba. So what we've seen in the global movement, rivers, national parks, forests, lakes have been designated as legal persons or legal entities subjects of rights. But that designation has yet to occur for the ocean as a whole or for any marine ecosystems. And this is certainly a gap because, simply put, the ocean is our source of life and supports all life on the planet, regardless of where you are. And she's hurting. And we have one ocean. Regardless of the imaginary boundaries that we put on our maps, the ocean ebbs and flows beyond those boundaries. So not only that, but with 70% of the planet being ocean and about half of the planet being ocean beyond national jurisdiction, so beyond territorial waters, what happens when a protected species from one nation's states passes beyond those imaginary lines? It is no longer protected unless it is by international law such as CITES. So what we need to do is really look at how to turn these isolated actions to protect and restore the ocean health and come together. And so in collaboration with the governments of Cabo Verde, Monaco, and the Ocean Race, the Earth Law Center has been leading a campaign to garner support for the introduction of and further exploration of a universal declaration of ocean rights in the United Nations General Assembly this September. And Aruba, as we've noted, has already taken the first step by recognizing the rights of their territorial waters. And I know we have Minister Aren's support for this international initiative, but I do hope that we can continue the dialogue and gain further support from the kingdom as a whole. So with that, one thing we've heard today is higher standards. Rights of nature leads to higher standards of protection. So I'd like to turn to Ms. Callie first to hear from your perspective, what does higher standards or rights of the ocean, rights of nature mean, but in the context of marine ecosystems?
Thanks, Rochelle, for that great question and for spearheading ocean rights work around the world. I think higher protection for the ocean in the context of the rights of nature can look in many different ways. I think we're talking a lot about creating new MPAs in the context of reaching 30% protection of our territorial waters by 2030. So I think the creation and designation of new MPAs, but also increasing implementation of management plans within existing MPAs is also important. So for example, in the Pearl Islands, I showed some videos of sea turtles being caught in fishing gear, but that fishing gear is actually already illegal within that space. So even though the Pearl Islands is designated as a protected area at this time, the laws protecting the species within this area aren't implemented. So that's an additional step that Panama can take, for example, to make sure that the rights of nature within the ocean space are being implemented. Additionally, as I mentioned, the concept of coral reef restoration, the restoration of coastal and oceanic habitats like coral reefs and seagrass beds and mangrove forests. Additionally, thinking about like what healthy means within the ocean environment. So we don't want to just have ocean ecosystems that are surviving. We want them to be thriving. They have the right to thrive. So we don't want to fish stocks until they're just above the edge of collapse. We want to allow them to actually recover, be replenished, and thrive while being fished sustainably. So it's a little bit of a change in our perspective on what we put at the center of our decision making. So we want to put the health of the ocean and the ocean ecosystems at the center, and then figure out how society can act in harmony with the ocean in that way. Thinking about ecotourism as part of the society in Aruba, looking at the ocean rights within ecotourism could mean making sure ecotourism activities are putting nature first and respecting nature's rights. For example, dolphin watching or whale watching, making sure that the boats aren't coming too close to the endangered species and giving them their space, making sure that the needs of nature are prioritized over the needs of the tourists. And I can assure you that inevitably the tourists will respect Aruba's leadership in prioritizing nature, and they will be inspired by that and maybe take that back to their own countries as well. The last example I'll just share is advocating for the rights of sea turtles in Panama. So even though we have this national rights of nature law, we've taken that next step within the ocean space and within a specific species group to identify like what the rights of sea turtles should be within ocean ecosystems and what steps need to be taken at the ocean level to make sure the rights of this endangered species group is being protected. So there are many ways that ocean rights needs to be addressed, and I think we're just beginning to tap the tip of the iceberg on some of these issues. So.
Thank you, Callie. Now I'd like to turn to Ms. Nadine to hear from your perspective, being from Aruba, how might this look?
Well, I think that for Aruba this is also very important because as a small island we're surrounded by water, and we were with our guests last Wednesday, I think it was. We had an island tour, and the minister mentioned to me that right now 0.2% of our territorial waters are being protected, and I didn't know that. I was quite shocked. So I think it's very important. Like now we have 4 marine protected areas, and we're already trying to expand that to an island-round marine park. And this is very important to prepare us for the negative impacts of climate change, the part of climate adaptation. Our coral reefs, our mangrove forests, those are they will protect us from hurricanes and storms. And during this tour, I was standing next to Augustine and at a certain point we visited a mangrove patch, and there was construction being done there. And then I looked at Augustine, and Augustine had this look of shock on his face, and he said, "How is this possible? This would never happen in Ecuador." And I'm very proud to be born and raised in Aruba, but at that point I felt ashamed to, that this is still happening in Aruba. So I think that's.
Thank you. Yet, hopefully with rights in nature, we can prevent actions like that in the future. So we just have one final question. We're going to end bringing it back to the local context again here, and to really see, what changes might the community, the industries, the government of Aruba expect from this transition. And so I'd like to start by handing it to Carlos first.
Well, for the government, I think the biggest change will be the responsibility, because it's not only for others to comply with, it's also for the government to comply with. When the government has certain ideas or projects, it's always considering nature with different types of policy and legislation. It's enforcement, it's the other obligations that the concept of law puts on the government, the constitutional instructions. So for the government, I think the key word is responsibility. And for Aruba as a country, I think it will lead eventually to a new balance, harmony. It won't happen from one day to the other, but I think 10, 15, 20 years from now, we will look back and see that it was possible. It was possible to develop with quality. It was possible to build with nature, to live in harmony with nature, to recognize the rights of nature, to respect them. So I don't think it will be a change from one day to another, but I do think we will look back and realize that a significant difference was made and a good seed was planted.
Thank you. So, Geert, you have some big shoes to fill closing us out. What would you like to end the
Do
panel
you think?
with?
No, I think it's a final comment. What Carlos says is absolutely true. It has to do with the making of new laws, new policies, and if you have a new fundamental right that's being added, you cannot bypass that anymore as a government. But also as a community, you have to take that into account. And I think that applies for the government especially. It's a responsibility, definitely, but also for the community and the rest of the society. That's for new, but existing, I think we might have to review in some cases what the current situation is. And that could definitely look at, for instance, Holland, where you have the Urgenda case, and where you have the climate crisis is one, but you have the stikstofbeleid, so the farmers who are facing some challenges. I think this is all based on also the right of nature, and that could be a very interesting discussion in the future. I cannot predict the outcome for Aruba, but it will definitely be interesting.
Thank you all to the panelists for your incredible answers, responses, and for being here with us today. And then we're going to turn it back to our amazing MC and I think start some Q&A.
You were amazing. Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you, Michelle. Super, thank you. Well, now we have the ladies of the team with wireless mics and walking around to some questions. I see photographers, I see advocates. Wow, those, very rapidly, they have questions for our panel. Thank you, by the way, panelists. You're excellent. Tikkie muziek in background, see?
Okay. Bom dia. My question is for Geert Rep. You mentioned you have experience with court cases and now it's reached the top level, so amendment of the Constitution. My question is, what has been the role in your experience of bottom-up initiatives on Aruba? So citizen initiatives, for example, NGOs, what has been the role in this whole process? And so getting to the question of can citizen initiatives actually or truly influence governmental decision-making on Aruba?
Thank you very much. That's of course a very good question. Totally in my line with the NGO Aruba BirdLife. Started many court cases. Actually won them all, but don't want to brag about it too much. So therefore, thank you. No, the thing is, most of the time, you need people's awareness, and this was especially by Greg Peterson. You do it for the children. You create something within the society, awareness, and you want the people to understand that this is a very important topic. From there on, apparently, it has some effect. And now, I think, also based on the initiative of the minister, this is the moment to reach the highest level. But if you don't start without the input of the community, then probably this fundamental right will not have any effect. So you need that broad leverage to get to something like this. And I think this is the right moment for that.
Just raise your hands and the lady will, yes. I got more here. Elizabeth.
Hi. Buon tardi, good afternoon. Are we? Yes, no, 4 minutes. My name is Elizabeth Guanipa. I'm a freelancer journalist. My question is to Mr. Gaimo. We are at the early stages of the rights of nature being legislated into our constitution. But I would like to know, have you thought about the measures that would be needed to guarantee the part of enforcement from the government, that this will live through or will be carried out through different administrations, and maybe this is something that the other panelists may have experience with and may contribute to the answer.
Thank you for the question, Elizabeth. In Aruba, it is no secret locally that we have a problem with enforcement. We introduce many laws, but they are not always enforced properly. We don't have the manpower for it. It costs money. So we are very conscious of this. And as I said, this is the first step. It is for good reason that the concept includes constitutional instructions to the government, which include the enforcement of it. And a lot of more legislation will be necessary. The precautionary measures will be necessary. So this is something we have thought about, and that's why we emphasize that this is a first step. and that just passing this law will not help us reach our goal. So it is a very good point that we need to keep in mind that it's a long road. More laws will be needed, but it has to work in practice. As I said during my presentation, laws are only tools to reach your goals, and they are not the goal in itself. So it's going to be a long time, but as Minister Arend said, he plans to be in government for at least 11 more years. So with that, I'm sure that proper measures will be taken to carry the responsibility as we should, and not only for it to remain something symbolic. That's really the last thing we want, and that's why we try to make every article count. But thank you very much for your question.
In addition, can I say, in addition, enforcement, you talking about enforcement, of course, that's a role for the government, but also for the community itself. I mean, if you are not aware of the situation, then you can, as a government, if you then impose a fine or you do something and people do not understand, that is something that will not then be reiterated afterwards. So what you need to do, I think, is to get the people more educated in that sense in order to prevent further enforcement. Because at the end of the day, people don't listen. You have to enforce, and city inspectors and everything need to be in place. Yeah.
I want to add something very short, and that is putting the rights of nature in the Constitution is like having a really nice artwork. But to put it on a wall, you need a nail and a hammer. So it's not enough to have that artwork. You need the hammer and the nail. The hammer are the judges, and the nail are the citizens. And you have to train judges, and you have to train citizens, and you have to educate citizens and judges to be able to enforce that. So let's not leave all the enforcement to the government, but let's make sure that if we want that artwork right there, we need a collaboration from all of us.
Thank you. That's an excellent lead to my follow-up question to Mr. Gaimo. You mentioned a State of the Nature report given to the Parliament every 5 years. My question is, why not sooner? Why not every year or every 2 years in order to raise awareness? And in the meantime, you are getting ready, getting done with the Constitution, changes in the Constitution. All the NGOs and all the citizens can help towards the same goal.
Yes, the reasoning behind every 5 years, and of course sooner is possible. Excuse me. You could consider it a maximum time frame, but the reason is because we wanted it to be a realistic law that gets complied with. And we have to be honest that our governmental apparatus, we don't have enough people to guarantee that such a report of quality can be produced on a yearly basis, for example. You know, like in the Netherlands, I've seen there's a similar constitutional article for a report on the state of education. And you will get like these 200-page reports every year. If we do that over here, Nadine is going to be writing reports for 6 months, and a lot of other work will not get done. So ideally, it would be more often. Definitely, I agree with that. But to not put things into our Constitution that we know that probably we won't comply with, then we opted for, you know what, let's put the maximum time frame at every 5 years so we can make sure that we can actually comply with the law, so there aren't all these symbolic measures in our Constitution that we cannot comply with. So that is actually the reason behind the 5-year period. It actually started as a proposal for a yearly period.
Thank you. We have space for one more question. One more. We're going for one more, and the last one.
Hi, good morning still, good afternoon. My name's Amber. I'm the UN Youth Representative from Aruba. I guess my question goes out to all of you. I was wondering, what is your experience with youth involvement in all of these initiatives, and especially when drafting constitutional things that are supposed to affect not just current generations, but also future and unborn generations? How do we see this playing out with their involvement in every step of the process to make sure that their voices and their needs don't get left out? Thank you.
I can start with that question. You know, I experienced the willingness, the interest of the youth as very positively when it comes to nature. You know, and understanding it, I see it very positively. It is also for the next generation, but don't be mistaken that it will serve current generations as well. And we are going to go through a lot of consultations with many different stakeholders, and the youth is a very important one with that. Information is very important. Everything starts with education. This is something I learned being involved in government. Every policy you want to execute successfully long term, to get that done, you will end up at education. You will always end up there. So the youth will have an important part in this, and we will have to involve them consciously. I don't know if anybody else would like to add something.
I can add something. In many of the cases that we have like a lot of youth interaction. In the case that I was showing of the gas flaring, there are 9 girls who like promoted the case. The case of the Amazon was actually won for the Amazon as a rights-bearing entity and the rights to future generations. So it's really, really important to give a voice to nature. I think that for children and for youth, rights of nature is obvious, so it makes sense. And you know, it's when you start getting older that you see all the obstacles. But for youth, it's really important. That's why, like with GARN, with the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, we have a youth hub that has like a lot of educational tools and a lot of like involvement of young people, because that's the reason why we are doing that. So the voice of youth is really, really important, and we have seen youth win cases for the rights of nature. So really important to get you guys involved.
All right. I see a hand go up. Yeah, the last one, really. Here, the microphone, the last question here. Mr. Errol, de Freitas.
It's not really a question, it's actually a statement. Mr. Gaimo, you know, we could sit down and we could write all the laws that we want, and we should. We need these laws. But you know, this problem in Aruba did not begin now. It began from the moment we accepted a refinery, which was very necessary for the people to survive. And then we saw a second industry that took place. And that second industry was tourism, so we built hotels. Now, if we're talking about funding, how about, just like the example Mrs. Green gave with, you know, the times of slavery, and recently we've been addressing this issue of to give back what was owed and to be excused for all what happened historically. I wonder where the legislation can go retroactively to all the hotels that are going up today in the Eagle Beach area, right? And the future hotels that is coming in the other area. I think that if we would, while we're working on legislation, try to find the way to get funding from that, because everybody that historically came to our island, all the hoteliers, refineries, and etc. I think the refinery side is a capacidad station, as we would call it. But the hotels are, in fact, that's making a lot of money in this country, that they should pay into a fund for this. I think that this would be able to help you to push this legislation that we so much need to protect the environment for the island. That is what I wanted to add to what everybody's talking about today.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you. That was Mr. Errol de Freitas of the SNBA, right? Exactly, with its comment. Well, panelists, you've been great. Thank you once again for your insight and your feedback. Michelle, you were awesome. Thank you so much. Natalia, Kelly, Carlos, Professor Agustin, Geert, Nadine, thank you so much. All right? Laga nos sige.